So it is my pleasure to welcome everybody. Great to see you here. Always fun to be at South by, and always great to hang out with my friends from Vancouver, which I now consider dear friends. Since they visited us about a year and a half ago, I think it was. So a big shout out to organizing this day here in Austin. But it is my pleasure to kind of be part of this conversation at the speed of innovation, how creating centers of gravity at the heart of the sort of the new economy that we're building, and everybody kind of wants to create. So on this panel, we'll kind of dive into that and kind of get a sense of what are different things and components of that activation that creates those opportunities, those gravity centers, And I'm really excited here to have with me today Cam Lawrence, from New Lab, the CEO of New Lab, Mark Masangsang from Biologic, and Catherine Leroux from Mirari. Okay, I think not French, but I'm getting close. So I'll have them introduce themselves shortly, but I did want to give a little bit more context of it. And since I already was introduced here, I'm going to skip my own introduction. But one of the things that we are thinking about is really about placemaking. How do you create places that really attract people and people gravitate towards to whatever sort of their role is? And these are the centers of gravity. You want a place where you kind of build that trajectory of innovation, prosperity, community vibrancy. And we've seen several conversations already today that talk about that and how important, for example, DE&I and inclusion is in that conversation. Because if we're going to change America or change the world, we need to make sure everybody has a seat at the table and have part of the conversation, not just sort of like be standbys and kind of take for what we're creating for granted. So it's important to have that part of it. So imagine these centers of gravity as cosmic hubs drawing together diverse elements. You need to talk about talent, capital, research institution, entrepreneurial spirits, multicultural experiences. You want all of that mixed together because individuals don't own a monopoly of the best ideas. It's at the intersection of people that we create those ideas. And how do you bring that together? How do we create the flywheel of your economy? Because one thing is to create something, but you need that flywheel effect. You need to pour that energy and the financial outcome of a startup, of a company, back into your local economy to kind of grow that. That's really what these hubs and these sort of places and centers of gravity is all about. How you create your flywheel. How do you make that happen so that you kind of drive that economy? It's not enough to kind of, yes, we should be proud when we get invested if you're in Houston or Austin or everywhere else, if we get the capital coming from the valley. That's exciting. But where does that capital get redeployed when you have an exit? Back in the valley. Not necessarily in your economy. How do you create that local flywheel? Because that's an important part of driving your economy and your success. And I think we have people on the panel here that can speak to that, how important that is. In particular, I'm thinking about Cam here, how that works for New Lab, So without further ado, I want to dive into and have them speak because I'm just going to help them moderate and move here. But I have a sort of an opening prompt for them. And they're going to give their name and repeat the job title and affiliation. But then I want them to kind of finish the sentence, I'm changing the world by, and then ... And really think about what is their purpose and what's their why, and then kind of delve into talking about what is your organization and to talk about your organization. So why don't we start with, are you comfortable starting, Katrina?
Super comfortable. I'm really sorry. Day 3, I'm already losing my voice. And actually, I'm super French-Canadian, so I hope that you all understand everything I'm going to say. So I'm head of development of Mirari. Mirari, it's a creative studio that create immersive experience, interactive installation, and large-scale project for private and public space. So Mirari, we bridge a gap between arts and technology by placing human element at the heart of our experience. So we do believe at Mirari that we are changing the world by creating and transforming the public space in more functional, attractive, and inclusive place, and that met the need and aspiration of local community. So we create territory in which people are more inspired and get deeper engagement into their own environment when they play with our project, with our creative project. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I love that. That's super cool, and that's very similar to how we think about place-based community building at New Lab. I'm Cam Lawrence, the CEO of New Lab. We have amazing physical spaces in Brooklyn, Detroit, and Uruguay in Latin America, where we're bringing together the top tier startups in climate and deep tech specifically, create a community and ecosystem to enable them to develop their products. We bring in corporate partners to help them commercialize their products, and then also provide access to capital. And our thesis is if we can help all of those key aspects of the early founder journey and do it at scale, then our startups will have an outsized impact in the world and better success rates, and that seems to be the way things are playing out. So I guess to Jan's question, what are we doing to make an impact in the world? We're helping startups at scale.
Nice to meet you all. So I'm Mark Masongsong, CEO and co-founder of Urban Logic. So I guess to answer the question, I'm trying to change the world by harnessing government data. So Urban Logic is a data science platform that takes data from across different government agencies, jurisdictions, and fuses it into one common operating picture that you can then use artificial intelligence to help governments understand what's happening in their communities and make better decisions. I think one of the main things that I think why I'm on the panel is Urban Logic has been a great beneficiary of the types of programs that we're going to talk about. So Startup in Residence, Jeremy Goldberg, who I think is here today, when he was in San Francisco, he created this program where it's very hard as a startup to get taken seriously by government. So he created a program where governments will specifically pick a problem that no one else has solved and give startups a chance in a 3-year contract. That opportunity got us credibility, and then we got into accelerators, 500 startups in Silicon Valley, and that's the type of thing that I think allowed us to get, from New York City, the Department of National Defense. That only happened because people made space for a tiny startup to be given a chance, and I think that's the type of thing that Cam's doing in New York, and we're great fans of their work there. So,
I appreciate that, and it's really interesting to see, because I want to actually go to you here, Katrina, because your previous role was actually on the government side, and I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that you actually work on the side supporting, kind of building the same thing, but now you're on sort of the side that actually is building instead of policy setting. And did you use data? I mean, maybe digging a little bit back here. How did that look from the other side, meaning from the government side?
It's sure that for us, like from the government side, for my past experience as Economic Development Commissioner, we do believe that to create a center of gravity, we should foster encounter between ecosystem. So multidisciplinary is a vector of innovation, and because they stimulating the idea, different perspective. So, and by putting all the skills and aptitude of different ecosystem, we're able to develop holistic solution to global challenge. So as a government, it was the kind of measure and program that we used to develop. And it's kind of project and program that now as a company, I think we benefit. Like that if I'm working with local authority, urban planner, innovation hub, or incubator, for us, it's help us to develop more innovative solution for the territory as a creative person. So.
Okay, and so in my role, and this is super interesting because in my role I've been involved with something called the Global Institute of Innovation District. There was a Brookings Institute report that was issued in, I think, 2015, 2016, that really looked at this new phenomena that's basically, flowing across the world about creating these centers of gravity, if you will, and they call them innovation districts. And they were differentiated from science parks, which we have had for a long time, in that they were highly programmed. And Dennis Lowry, he was the CTO of Cortex for a while, and one of his sort of issues, you don't have an innovation district without sort of heavy programming involved that creates value to the people that shows up. It's not just an office building. It is sort of that heartbeat of the place, and it's interesting to see that. So how much is an innovation ecosystem success sort of inherent in its geographical location? Is it really for everybody to be able to do? I mean, how much of it is sort of the geography, and how much will it, does it need to be shaped by deliberate policy and collaborations? I don't know if somebody want to
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and it's one that we think about pretty deeply from a New Lab leadership team, because we've found a lot of kind of magic in the model with the space-based aspect, and the diversity in New Lab itself is so critically important to the success of our founders. But there's also an aspect as well, which is being authentic to the regions that we do business in. And we opened up in Detroit last year, and as you can imagine, there's a huge focus on mobility. With the history of the auto industry there, and a lot of our startups are deeply intertwined with the corporate partners in that market, but also the next generation of what mobility will mean in the future, right? So there's a certain amount of the space base that has to be authentic to the region that you're participating in, not just in terms of the economic activity that's there today, but also the local communities. Like, we talked about the importance of diversity, and the Detroit in particular, I think we've got over 40% diverse founders, which is really outperforms the broader deep tech and climate tech industry at large, which we're really proud of. And in New York, we just launched Founder Fellowship, which focuses on cohorts of diverse founders. So we've had 50 diverse founders go through that program overall. It's sponsored by Bank of America, as well as New York's Economic Development Corporation. But yeah, another amazing cohort of founders that may have not had the same opportunity without that emphasis on diversity, but that really creates a richness of the fabric of these ecosystems that you're looking to build, and is authentic to the regions that you're doing business in. So I think it's absolutely critically important.
I love that, and that was actually when we created the Innovation District in Houston. Similar story. I think there has been several attempts in Houston to kind of create a hub and activity. It was always looking at, oh yeah, we want to be more like Silicon Valley or more like Austin, and it's like, doesn't work. Start from strength. When we admitted that Houston is a heavy asset industry ecosystem, don't have to be traditional oil and gas, but you have to admit where your strength is and where your talent is, when your expertise is. Then you can really build and accelerate that flywheel. And that's really a key part of when you think about those things. So Mark, what are your users of your platform seeing in sort of data to understand this problem in terms of geography and whatnot? Are you having some input and insight into that?
Yeah, I think following what Cam said is I think geography, and your local ecosystem will give you something unique. So I think, for example, a lot of the most advanced AI coming out of Vancouver is using computer vision to map forestry, or satellite imagery to map mining. Like, you start to see there's a core skill set of domain expertise. Like, AI is a general tool. It becomes powerful when you can apply it to a specific domain. So your community might have something unique in that domain. And if you actually look around the world, Israel is very good at defense products. There's a unique circumstance there. But I think also the other aspect is sometimes it can almost be created from scratch. I think that's one of the questions is, like, if you don't have a natural advantage, can you create something? As a company in government, we study which governments have really harnessed technology to build smarter governments and stronger economies almost out of nothing. And so we're big fans, obviously, of Tallinn, Estonia. Like, that's a government, if you look, Estonia is just famous for how they've harnessed technology to improve government. And then, just yesterday, if you check out a couple panels, there's a city in Finland. I think we've got some friends here from Tampere, Finland, and then Kelowna, BC. So if you look what they're doing in artificial intelligence, we study examples around the world, what we can adapt from and learn from, and you actually start to see the importance of leadership. So you might have a small team in Finland that are doing things that around the world are leading the world in artificial intelligence. Same with Kelowna. So I think one of the things is you're going to need a critical mass of talent, so people who experience in the technical skill sets. But the bigger thing is you're going to need a catalyst, and catalysts can come down to individual personalities. Like, someone takes the reins and says, we're going to build something. And I think, for example, Frontier Collective, we're all here. We see the initiatives happening because Dan Berger and Andrea Southcott, they took the initiative and says, we're going to marshal people together, and you can create something out of nothing. So I think you can look at, if you have an advantage, double down on that. But the other missing ingredient is you're going to need catalysts, individual leaders who take the initiative and show something can be done. Because people, I hate to say this, but most people are followers, right? And if you see something that's working, people will say, okay, I guess that's doable, and then they'll follow along. But that is, I think, the most important ingredient we've seen, is where you have sometimes down to an individual personality that kind of move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is really good. You want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that. It's going to be a total Montreal answer, but I don't think there's a particular geographical advantage, but I think that rather I see the openness and create the center of gravity. And I think that it's the duty of local authority to cultivate that openness, and this openness to the society and to the world is an attractiveness to business and talent without never compromising the local community.
I love that too, and to kind of build off what Mark was saying, I mean, the New Lab story is very much a story about a single individuals that had an amazing vision. You know, for us, it started with the Brooklyn Navy Yard in New York, and Mayor Bloomberg at the time was trying to figure out what to do with the Navy Yard space, and it was, you know, dilapidated, rundown, leftover, and, you know, bold, grand history there of all the U.S. warships that, you know, you would see in your history books in this country, not in Canada. But what to do with this amazing space? And our founders said, well, you know, we've got an 80,000 square foot space there. Let's build a clean tech ecosystem and really support founders at scale. And now there's 200 companies. We've had a couple billion in exits already, a huge amount of capital that's been raised. It's been a huge success story. And then the next person to come along was Bill Ford in Detroit. And he said, how do I replicate this success in New York, in my city, so that we can continue to be at the forefront of mobility innovation for the next generation? So my question is, like, who's going to be the Bill Ford or Mayor Bloomberg of Vancouver? Because I think that vision and that power is what is going to make something really special, that is a huge driver of job growth, economic development, innovation, all of those things. So I've got to thank Dan and the work that his team is doing. It's really inspirational, but, you know, it's a big lift, and it's worth it when you can build it.
Absolutely, and that's a good point. Like, you know, you need those role models, but you also need the leaders, and whether that is elected or, you know, the capital that you have available to you to actually lean in, because it does take time and patience to build this. I mean, I always say that building such a sort of critical mass and sort of these centers of gravity requires patient capital to get it off the ground. I mean, it's not something that you just flip a switch and it works, because it takes more than just networking and following and doing a meeting a few times. You kind of have to kind of keep getting that flywheel. Actually, you have to build the flywheels before you can start spinning it. So, you know, but it really, so one of the things that is very important is also talent, and we spoke about it a little bit. So, you know, and then to me, I've been an all-time academic in my almost entire career, so this is a little bit different for me being in the innovation ecosystem. But how can universities or research centers and educational institutions really contribute or participate? What is their role? Are they just a talent producer, or are they part of that heavy foot on the pedal to make that happen? And how successful? We often talk about Stanford and MIT, or being really, you know, but can most places, can that be replicated? Is there enough tech coming out of those places, or startups coming out of the university to make a difference?
In my opinion, absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the things that's kind of unique about New Lab is, you know, we have a huge pool of founders coming in that want to build their company and their companies within New Lab, which is an amazing place for me to be and my team to be. And as you can imagine, most of these folks are coming out of Harvard and MIT and Columbia, and we've got amazing relationships with those institutions, which create an amazing pipeline of top-tier talent to come in. And, you know, where we see it is, you know, and actually the gentleman that leads our applied innovation group, which partners with large industry, was actually tech transfer in Columbia for a very long period of time. So we understand, you know, the nature and the role of universities as institutions. We do think there's a natural handoff point between taking it out of academia and building your company, and that's the role that we look to play, which has been really worked out well, because when they come into New Lab, we build their companies, we have the ecosystem, we have the community, and then we also have all the infrastructure for them to develop their products, and all the support to enable them to do that. So yeah, I think the role that institutions play, and, you know, obviously Vancouver, SFU, I'm an alumni, UBC as well, a top-tier talent coming out of those institutions. It's just what do we do from the point where we have the founder that has the idea and has the vision? What else are we giving to them to make them successful? And ultimately, that's where we see our role.
Yeah, it's interesting, because one of the things that, you know, Greentown Lab was one of the tenants that came into our district in Houston, and they've been around for 10 plus years in Boston. And it took them like 6 or 7 years before they have 60 or 70 startups in their ecosystem, in their sort of incubator. They came to Houston, in 8 months they had 80 startups. You know, and what was surprising was that the 60 startups they had in Boston was largely postdocs and grad students coming out of college, kind of spinning out, taking their experiment TRL3 to a TRL5 in Houston. They were all mid-career pivots. I mean, talent that knew the problem, knew they could solve the problem, and wanted to start a business because their company didn't want to sponsor it. And if they started, the company may actually have funded it, but they didn't want to fund it inside the company. They wanted to spin it out. So it's an interesting thing. Now there's a tremendous sort of talent place that you then can join as a newly graduate to join those companies and actually start your career yourself. So we've seen, so that again, different ecosystems behave differently. Figure out what is sort of the cadence and the heartbeat of that ecosystem. So being in Vancouver now, I mean, so what do you see up there? What has Dan and everybody created up there that you're part of?
I think one of the main things is the importance of kind of, we're obviously very biased around artificial intelligence, and the problem with that is that actually the panel right before us talked about how AI is being commoditized at the base level. So what differentiates you is if you can figure out how to apply it to a problem. And so I think you do need people who have technical skill sets. We will always ask for more software engineers, more AI engineers, et cetera. But once you have that, the next thing that you need is people who understand problems. And so I think that is where if the universities can produce people who and graduates who have the ability to understand problems, create innovative solutions, I think that is where oftentimes the overlooked part is the need for universities to be a place where there can be cross-domain integration. I think some of the best programs out of SFU, for example, are programs where they run these student competitions where they pair, so a business student or a political science student has a business idea, but I can't code. So they'll pair you with a computer science grad, and then what they'll do is they'll have these competitions where members of the business community will come in and judge the competition. I think that gives you a forcing function to get people who would have never otherwise met, and you can then start matching the complementary skill set. So I think that is one of the things where I think sometimes governments, and I was in government, we made these mistakes, is, okay, so if we want to become a tech cluster, let's create 10,000 more computer science graduates. That is necessary but insufficient. Like, that is a good first step, but the next step is you need to focus on the cross-domain interdisciplinary skill sets.
I totally agree, and then that's where we see it as a slight spin from the point Mark was making. We see the huge value in the community. I mean, again, in Brooklyn, there's 200 New Lab members in our space there, but like the founder journey is very lonely. So if you're actually putting together a cluster of people that are working on similar business ideas, and there's someone where you could have a coffee with and help solve that problem with friends. I mean, that's critically important, and it's slightly different than your point you were making around the technology piece is just part of it, and that's true. But there's a certain amount of commonality in the founder journey, whether it's figuring out when you need to get legal counsel, like all of those different aspects of starting up, where when you're a founder, you just don't know where those resources are. Who can help you answer those particular questions? It's critically important. That's part of why a community is so impactful on success rates.
Awesome. I want to pivot back a little bit to inclusive, and because one of the things that is that being from Houston, the most diverse sort of major metropolis really in North America, we made a conscious decision when we wanted to start a thing. For us, if we could not solve and be diverse, Black, brown, and women had to have a role in our ecosystem. And how do you do that? We thought very carefully about how we curated panels, conversations, because if I just invite you to sit and watch us talk about it, you're not a role model for your community. So we wanted the community leaders in those that are Black and brown and females to be part of the conversation. How are we addressing that? What are the best way of doing that? And are we comfortable? I mean, I was really excited about the panel earlier today about the conversation around indigenous, and access and whatnot. How do we make that part of what we do? Because it is a power move.
So I think that from our side, creative project have the power to, through the story detail, to change the narrative of the cities. So I told you, like 2 years ago, I have a conversation with a guy from Belfast that puts on a digital creative project, and like he told us how it's changed the way people see each other, and like they discover the city in a new way and talk each other. So I think that the creative project can change the narrative. They can remove the stigma of history, and like like kind of project that we develop, we encourage participation of citizens. We encourage collaboration between citizens. So we do think that we can act on the renewal on social tie, and by contributing to the construction of a more meaningful and positive identity. We do believe that it's a good way to promote inclusiveness. But like I heard what you say before, and sometime, and maybe a lot of time, placemaking, it's like a big a plaster on a big bobo. And like we think that we can do miracle with our creative project, and they try to include people at the end of the project. So I think that creative, different community, all the communities should be at the beginning of the conversation, because we are not developing creative project for them. They are developing the project for, they need to be at the conversation, and they need to be at the first. No.
Very good. And having a sort of inclusive conversation is really where we need to start. And then the diverse thought actually will create better companies for investors to invest in. I mean, it's proven. And I'm very interested to hear, you had a pretty large number of sort of quote unquote underrepresented, founders. Question is, does the capital follow accordingly?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think what we have seen, and we're on our third. I was mentioning founder fellowship. We're in our third cohort now, so we're up to 50 plus diverse founders that we've supported. And the last group just started, I think it was last week, and it was really cool to see, because as we were walking, we're going through that day, then my memory starts to jog, and I start to remember all the alumni from prior cohorts which are having amazing success stories. And we had a session earlier where we talked about the flow of capital being pretty thin to everything non-AI related last year. But that said, to answer your question, I mean, of the founders in Founder Fellowship in prior cohorts, what we've seen is a lot of success, a lot of flow of capital, because the money will follow good ideas and good founders, irrespective of background and origin. So, and ultimately, what we're trying to do is give access to the same support that everyone else should get, right? And really tilt the New Lab platform to drive better outcomes for everyone that all the founders that we're interacting with. So I'm happy to say that there's been a lot of success stories that show that good founders, regardless of origin, are going to have just as good success rates as otherwise. But I think the bigger thing is we have to be very deliberate about it. It can't just be something that happens, or it's a plaque on a wall or whatever. It has to be like, that's why we go through the process of finding the best diverse founders we can in Founder Fellowship. It's why in Detroit we have Black Tech Saturdays led by amazing leaders, have created an amazing ecosystem and community there in Detroit that's been super successful and authentic to that community. So it can't just be something that's a motto or a slogan. It has to be deliberate actions against it. And when you do that, you can see the success that you're looking for.
Deliberate action. I think that's the one takeaway. So I'm going to ask, we're kind of wrapping up here, and I'm going to ask one question, and I kind of want each of you to answer. And this is the question you haven't seen, so, sort of, if there are other people in the room, or I'm going to assume there is, they're not just New Lab and Frontier and Montreal and Ion, there's going to be part of other innovation districts. What is one advice you would want to share with them, or maybe one pitfall to be on the lookout for, as you embark on building your own innovation district or your own center of gravity? What is that one thing, if you can think about it, that would be an ask or an offer or suggestion? Start with you, Mark.
For me, I think it would be to start with a commercialization opportunity, because I think there's lots of programs where governments will create grants, which are nice, tax credits, which are nice, create funding for more students, which are nice. But at the end of the day, investors really want to see, can you make money, right? Yeah. And so I think that the big difference with us was, again, Startup in Residence by Jeremy Goldberg in San Francisco. When we got that first contract, as a Canadian company, getting a contract with the City of San Francisco, honestly, it wasn't easy, but suddenly the investment discussion became different. It was like, a major city in the United States will buy from you, so you must be real, therefore I'll invest in you. Like, it was very hard to raise money from investors previously. And then when you get that validation, that it's not, even if we'd raise investment, people are like, okay, you can raise money, but that's not the same thing as building a company. Being able to solve a real problem and get paid for it is the one thing that investors look for. So I think it's almost like, everything else follows from that one thing. If you give companies, like, so if we're to create, Frontier Club, we're to bring in, New Lab, build a great $150 million tech hub in Vancouver, which I think is all over fantasy. I think the first first thing I would do is I'd go to the local business community and local governments and say, join this program and identify problems that you would like to be solved, allow them to come, and this is actually something that happens in New Lab, and people in the businesses come in and pitch startups, like, can you solve this problem? And if startup can solve it, then you can get your first contract. You get your first contract, you can raise money. When you raise money, you can hire people, and once you're hiring people, that is when you create that flywheel effect. But I think if you could pick one thing, it's create commercial optimization opportunities.
Very quickly, I know we're running out of time. So Cam, any thoughts on that?
I agree with what Mark said. Understand what your local economy is built on, and use those assets to build the future of innovation. I think about Vancouver. I mean, rich in mining and forestry. Everything to do with the port and the ocean. Like there's a huge amount of infrastructure and commercial activity that's there. That should be the basis, in my opinion, of how you build your tech ecosystem around that. I imagine it's the same story for you in Houston, right?
Yeah. Katrin.
And for me, I think that creative company and artists are really disruptive and have a different perspective on urban development. So we should include those creative company, those artists at the beginning of the process of the transformation. And they're part of the ecosystem, and we should not be at the end of the conversation.
I love that. So with that, help me thanking Mark, Cam, and Katrina for an amazing conversation. We'll be around. I think we'll be around. I'm not sure what I'm promising. Somebody has deadlines, but looking forward to the continuing here. Thank you.